Very respected speaker of this evening, CA Himanshu, CA Panaraj, Secretary of SARC, and the members of this profession. Very good evening to all of you. It is very heartening for me to be amongst you all once again for yet another interesting session of professional interest and on a topic of contemporary importance. Audit reporting under Companies Act 2013, issues and developments. We are very fortunate to have our learned speaker, C. Himanshu, to deliver and share his wisdom and a wide range of knowledge on the subject of today. Our speaker addressed in various branches of ICAI, and he has been frequently with us in many of our SARC programs in the past. I derive great pleasure in extending our hearty and a warm welcome to him, and we are extremely thankful to him for his love and affection towards SARC and addressing us. Members, we are facing an extraordinary situation due to COVID, thus not able to meet together physically to share our knowledge. However, our members have been showing enormous amount of determination and interest to SARC to conduct programs through virtual mode on continuous basis. We are not lagging behind on their expectations. It is amazing that each and every program of us getting excellent response from members irrespective of the topics. This program, I am sure, would bring new concepts and the complaints procedures that one should adopt and express in clear terms while reporting under the provisions of Companies Act. There have been many changes introduced from time to time by competent authorities in regard to disclosure aspects in the financial reporting in concerns with accounting standards and the standards of auditing. Our learned speaker would take us through the various facets governing report requirements in line with the recent developments that have been made mandatory by way of latest circulars and notifications issued by the Corporate Affairs of India from time to time. I am very confident that today's presentation, not only lively, it will be interesting and exciting one. I extend my hearty welcome to each one of the participants for this great program. Before into the topic, I appeal to all of you to strictly adhere to the restrictions imposed by the central and the state governments due to COVID pandemic. Stay safe, stay at home, keep fresh, rest and relax. Try to perform your professional services through work from home. With this, I request CA Panaraj sir to introduce the speaker for the benefit of the viewers.
Thank you, Chairman. Once again, I welcome you all, and I take the pleasure of introducing the eminent speaker of the day, Himanshu Krishandawala. The speaker has completed his BCom, DCM, and FCA with he is a member of the fellow member of the institute, and securing rank both at inter and final levels. And he has formed an LLP of Chartered Accountants at Mumbai with 400 plus staff and offices at Vadodara, Chennai, Bangalore, Delhi, Pune, and overseas at Dubai. So overseas, the audit and assurance practice of the firm, particularly audit of large corporates, including Fortune 500 companies, Ind-AS implementation, investigations, due diligence, assignments, and conversions of financial statements from Form 1 GAAP to IFRS, US GAAP, etc. He has worked as a senior lecturer in accountancy and computer systems from 86 to 2000. He has co-authored the books on accountancy and financial management. Also, his involvement with ICAI has been, he was co-opted for various committees, especially Accounting Standards Board, Ind-AS Implementation Committee, Expert Advice Committee, Research Committee, Corporate Laws Committee, and also a member of various groups of ICI like FRRB, Guidance Note on Revised Schedule 6 and Guidance Note on Schedule 3 to the Companies Act 2013. Members Shield Panel, ICI for ICI Awards for Excellence in Financial Reporting. His involvement with BCAS also is there. So he is he is a director and a member of audit committees of various companies also. So with this extraordinary exposure to the field of the topics for the day, it is very useful for us. And this erudite personality's presentation will be very, very apt for the day, as our chairman pointed out that so many amendments are taking place. We have to gear up to those things. These words I welcome Himanshu sir to present his views.
Right. Good evening to all of you. The chairman, Mr. Jalapati, the secretary, Mr. Pannaraj, and all others, seniors and colleagues who are there on the call, who have taken out Saturday evening to hear to this particular topic. It is not the best of the topic to listen on a Saturday evening, but I see more than 300 people who have enrolled for this. So obviously, working from home has helped because you are also able to devote time on a Saturday evening for such a technical session. So let me start sharing the screen. Can you see the screen?
Yes, sir.
You can see the presentation, right?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Right. So this is the topic which we are going to discuss today. Audit reporting under Companies Act, some issues and developments. Now, obviously, there are developments which are there, but along with developments, there are also several issues which a lot of us tend to ignore because the Companies Act is now what 6 or 7 years old. It really started on 1st April 14, so already 6 years old, and there are several issues which we tend to forget, ignore, or bypass, and they keep on coming again and again when notices come from the ROC and the regional director and all. So I have thought it fit to even cover some of those issues which we should be careful about, plus some of the new developments which are happening either at institute level or at the Ministry of Corporate Affairs level as far as reporting for this particular year is concerned. So let's start this thing. If you have any questions, you can address all your questions. I will take all of them at the end. Whatever best possible, we'll take all the questions which are there. Now, when you come to audit reporting for companies, you have the Companies Act, which lays down various provisions for reporting by statutory auditors. And you have got Section 143 of the Companies Act, your subsections 1 to 15, which lay down reporting requirements. Now, this is a section which is not very easy to forget because the section 143 is also a very important section in the Income Tax Act, because for all assessments, whether it is scrutiny or your intimations which come, it is this section which is even relevant in the Companies Act. So section 143, as I keep on telling a lot of people, is a very important section for professionals, whether you are in the tax practice or whether you are in the audit field as such. So this section 143 of the Companies Act has 15 subsections. We will run through all the subsections, the important points in the reporting which are there. In one of these sections, one rule has got changed somewhere in the last week of March, which we will discuss. There is an amendment to Rule 11 in this sections 1 to 15. The Companies Act, however, only tells you what all is need to be reported. How do you actually report? The format in which you actually report is governed by the standards on auditing, which are issued by our institute and now notified by NFRA. Now, the standards on auditing are primarily based on your international standards on auditing with some modifications. And if you see NFRA, some of the reports which they have issued, the audit quality review reports, they have given a lot of stress to compliance of standards on auditing. And just before 2 days, NFRA has released on their website a list of companies which would be subjected to NFRA review in that sense. They predominantly cover listed entities, but they do also cover a lot of other non-listed entities especially banks, and that would also include some of the bank branches and other things. So NFRA is something which lays a lot of stress to compliance on standards on auditing, and we will see going down the line why these standards are becoming more and more important for all of us. Before even going to this reporting under Companies Act, I wanted to take you through some of these important appointment requirements, because we have found that in a lot of cases your appointment sometimes is not valid because of some violations which are committed in that sense. So I will just run you through this appointment procedure which is there. So appointment to be done once in 5 years, no requirement for ratification for every year. Now this is important. You cannot have an appointment of less than 5 years. Your appointment has to be for 5 years. You cannot have a company secretary saying that no, this is up to 5 years and I will reappoint you every year or something. Every year it's only a ratification which needs to be done. Mandatory retirement for after 5 or 10 years for individuals or firms. Now that retirement is only for a particular class of companies, which you are all aware, it's mainly listed companies or all companies which have a borrowing or capital beyond the threshold, which is there on the next slide. A clarification came on 15th April from the institute that a proprietary firm or an individual CA who is practicing can only do one term as per section 139 of the Companies Act. So proprietors therefore will have to look at this clarification which has come from the institute. If you are getting appointed as the first auditors of a company, a new company which is formed, then you can actually do 11 years. Assuming that the company falls into rotation and becomes a big company, you can do 1 + 5 + 5, because only when shareholders appoint you, the rotation rules apply. In the first year, it is only the board of directors which appoints you. No rotation for small companies, and this small companies definition has been recently revised. So if you have a company with up to almost 200 crores turnover, it is still a small company. There would be no rotation in such cases. Now these are the rules for rotation. All listed companies or unlisted companies with a capital more than 10 crores, private companies with a capital more than 50 crores. If you have a borrowing of more than 50 crores, then again rotation applies. Once you rotate out, there is a cooling period for 5 years. However, as per SQC 1, which is the first standard on auditing, standard on quality control, rotation of audit engagement partner needs to be done every 7 years. Now, a lot of firms sometimes forget this, because when you have a peer review which will happen, or maybe even an NFRA review, they will look at this requirement, that is the audit engagement partner rotating every 7 years. So you cannot have the same partner signing an audit report for more than 7 years at a time. After that, you can have someone else to sign from your firm, some other partner, and then you can start signing again for another 7 years or something. Only some exceptions are given for proprietorship concerns in this SQC 1 in this rotation of engagement partner. Now, who are eligible to be auditors? Obviously, you need to be a CA. It is either a firm or a LLP who can be appointed. Now, this non-eligible points are important. The following are not eligible for appointment. So you have to see this financial interest test. So if a person or his relative is holding any security in the company or subsidiary or holding or associate company in excess of a face value of 1 lakh, then you are ineligible. Or if you are indebted or you have given a guarantee to the company or subsidiary holding associate in excess of rupees 1 lakh. Now this you believe is a very simple thing. You have obviously seen this when the Companies Act 2013 came. The problem what happens is, say for instance, you are appointed the auditor of a branch of State Bank of India. Now, if you are appointed auditor of a branch of State Bank of India and you also hold a credit card of State Bank of India, then you are said to be indebted to the bank for more than 1 lakh. You may not even have a spending of more than 1 lakh, but if your credit card has a limit of more than 1 lakh, you are considered to be indebted, because technically you can have a credit up to or 1 lakh or more with that particular credit card. So that will automatically disqualify you from taking that particular audit. And remember, this is not only to the partner of the firm, but also to a relative who is there. So be careful about this financial interest test, and especially when you are getting into this bank branch audits or anything in that sense. The second is the business relationship test, and in smaller towns, this test is lot of times violated. Now, what is this test? This says that if you are disqualified if the auditor has a business relationship with the company or subsidiary, holding or associate company. Now, the section goes on and further says that what are these relationships which are considered, and the relationships which are will be construed as a transaction for commercial purpose, except if you are doing any professional services which are allowed to be rendered by the auditor, and if they are commercial transactions in the ordinary course of business at arm's length, like a customer doing business of telecom, airline, hospital, hotels, or similar businesses. So if your client is into, say, a telecom, airline, hospital, hotel, or a similar business, and you do a transaction with him at arm's length, then it is not considered a disqualification. Now, how do we have to look at this? Say, for instance, you have a client who runs a hotel. Now, you have a function in the family, maybe a birthday party or a marriage or whatever, and you tell your client, I want your hotel to be booked for a party which I want to host. The client says that, oh, since you are my auditor, I am going to give you 50% discount on all the services which you take at the hotel. You will be very happy that, yes, oh, I have that as my client, I'm getting 50% concession. The moment you do that, the transaction is not at arm's length, because he is not giving 50% to any other customer in that sense. So the moment you take that 50% discount in a hotel where you are the auditor, since it is not at arm's length, you will be disqualified from becoming an auditor in that particular case. And this, again, if you see the example, only talks of service companies. If you are doing an audit of a, say, company who is, say, dealing in cement, and you are buying cement from him for constructing your house or something, that is just not possible, because that is not something which is similar to telecom, airline, hospital, or something. So be careful about this. Lot of people come and tell me, oh, then I will not buy anything in my name or my firm's name. I will buy something in my wife's name or my some other family member's name. That is easier said than done. And that also, why do you want to really violate? It is always better to do this through a agent of that particular client or something in that sense. So you should not pay the hotel or anyone directly. They may have agents, they may have some other people who may be intermediaries, and through whom you will have to go in case you want to really take the services of your clients as such. Now, besides audit, you can provide only such services which are otherwise allowed, but these services are specifically not permitted. Accounting and bookkeeping, internal audit, design of financial system, actuarial services, investment advisory, banking, outsourced financial management services, and we'll see what are management services called. Now, this again, is a very simple thing. It is there since, lot of years. Even in the earlier Companies Act, this was there. But I still find a lot of audit firms who say that, okay, we will also help the client to write his books of accounts in Tally or any other software which is there. Maybe I have another partner who will not take a COP, but I will still write his books of accounts and I will do the audit. In a lot of smaller towns, people come and tell us that, oh, if we don't do that, the client will go away or something. Now, let me tell you that if you are having that mindset that I want to really violate some of these provisions, you will finally one day or the other get caught in that peer review or something else which is there, because the client is sometimes going to go and tell someone that my same chartered accountant is writing my books also and also doing my audit in that sense. So sooner you should give away this practice. Maybe you tie up with a friend of yours and say that you run a firm which is only doing these services. I will have a firm which is only doing these services, and let us both earn separately, even not having any connection in that sense. But in smaller towns, we find this very, very rampant. And I think if we are doing this, we are spoiling the image of the profession. And I'm sure the institute is also aware about this, but either they are looking the other way because they may otherwise say that, oh, our members may not have any work as such, or they are really ignorant about what is really happening in practice at ground level in lot of these towns which are there as such. When it comes to management services, now you should also know that all this restrictions apply not only to the partners but also apply to any other firm where you are a common partner or where your brand name or other is common in that sense. But this NFRA had defined recently what is this management service, and they said that management services are taken as services performed by the statutory auditor for the management, or even providing any kind of support inclusive of analysis, research, advice that is required by the management for performance of those actions or functions. Now, this is actually going even beyond what the institute would have said as what is management services. But NFRA is a statutory body, and if this definition is finally accepted by the ministry and they bring it in the Companies Act and the institute doesn't really do anything about it, then a lot of our members are going to face problem who are doing audit for companies, because this literally means that even taxation services may not be possible to be given by the same CA firm who is doing your statutory audit in that sense. The code of ethics which came in July 20 also don't go to this level, but since this is NFRA, the institute, we have been suggesting since now almost 1 year that the institute comes up with a definition of what is management services, so that there is a lot of clarity on the members as to what can be done and what cannot be done in that sense. When it comes to remuneration of auditors, for the first year it's decided by the board, subsequently to be decided at every EGM of the company. Expenses incurred by the auditor in conduct of audit is additional, and any facility which is given by the company for audit is also additional. For any other services, it is only the board of directors who can, or the managing director who can approve the fees. Therefore, that no approval is required at EGM. Like say, for instance, the tax audit is done, or maybe some taxation services are rendered as permissible. No approval at EGM, only the managing director or someone can approve in that sense. But please be sure that you have an engagement letter for all your audits which are there, and in the engagement letter the fees are also mentioned for that particular year which is there. And the resolution for remuneration should be very explicit, otherwise the fees can amount to an advance or loan and subsequent disqualification. Now take an instance where the audit fees for one client you have is say 3 lakh rupees. There is a marriage in your family and you tell the client that please give me half the fees in advance, because anyway I am going to complete the audit after the year ends. Now the moment you take half the fees in advance, or 1.5 lakhs, which crosses that limit of 1 lakh, you are automatically disqualified, because it's in advance which is taken. You cannot take fees in advance unless you have a resolution to that effect. Audit fees are due only after you sign the financial statements. Till that, the job is not over and you cannot get your audit fees. Otherwise, you can get disqualified if that amount exceeds rupees 1 lakh, which is there. When it comes to removal of auditors, you need a special resolution before the expiry term. You can resign in case you are not comfortable in doing that particular audit, but Institute has now again come up with guidelines as to in what circumstances you can resign. And if someone else is to be appointed as auditor other than the retiring person, you need a special notice, and some other procedures need to be, or formalities need to be complied with the ROC. Now, please be clear that you follow these procedures, because if you don't follow these procedures, your appointment can be illegal, and not only the ministry or MCA, but even the institute can take action against you as to why did you accept an audit without completing the procedures which are there. As I understand, after talking to maybe a lot of council members, they say that a lot of proceedings in the disciplinary mechanism of the institute are on appointment of auditors, are on not obtaining NOC properly from the earlier auditor, and not following the due process when you are resigning as an auditor. So be careful about this. It is something like, I mean, if you do something big, say for instance like opening a bank account. When you open a bank account, you do complete all the formalities which are there. Similarly, when you take up a new audit, you should complete all the formalities properly. You cannot take it for granted that no, that will be done later on or something in that sense. So resignation, as I said, is something which is now important to consider, because you cannot give any reason, any XYZ reason for resignation. Now appointment is for 5 years. In between, if you want to go away, you need to resign. And the institute in December 18 gave an implementation guide on how do you resign or withdraw from an engagement from an audit. So the institute has said that the auditor should describe the circumstances while giving the reasons for resignation, instead of mentioning ambiguous reasons such as preoccupation or personal reasons or administrative reasons or health reasons or mutual consent or unavoidable reasons. Now, if you see, most of the resignations which were given before this guide came from the institute, everyone used to say personal reasons, mutual consent, health reasons, unavoidable reasons. The institute says these are not acceptable. Now, not only the institute has said this, what the registrar of companies, in case of resignations, has also started issuing notices to the audit firms saying that if you are giving a reason that other preoccupation, why did you even accept the audit if you are otherwise not intending to do the audit? And they are starting penalty proceedings or uh, proceedings for compounding against the audit firm. They are not doing anything with the company because the company says we do not know why the auditor resigned. He says preoccupation. They are proceeding against the auditor, not the company. So be careful when you resign as auditors. It has to be a reason which is clearly mentioned in your resignation letter. Now, the institute said that some of the valid reasons for resignation could be non-payment of fees, not getting proper evidence for the audit. If the matter is for, say, material misstatement of financial statements, then you write all those things in your letter of resignation, or if you cannot legally continue to be an auditor, that is, otherwise if you are disqualified. Now, a lot of people come and tell us that, oh, I am not comfortable signing the report. He is wanting me to sign something wrong. In such a case, therefore, I want to resign. Now, there I think you should actually say that why you are resigning. You can say that the sales are not properly shown and they are not willing to change. You have a right to issue a qualified report. So issue a qualified report and then resign. Don't resign for frivolous reasons, because then the company is not going to be punished, the auditor and the audit firm is going to be punished in such cases as per this guide and as per the action which is recently now being started with the registrar of companies. Another thing which most firms forget is this section 146, that the auditor is supposed to attend the annual general meeting. So if you see this section, it says the company has to forward the notice of the AGM to the auditor, and the auditor shall, unless otherwise exempted, attend either by himself or through his authorized representative. Now, this makes it mandatory for the auditor to attend the AGM even for small private limited companies. It doesn't say big listed or other companies. Even a small private limited company, auditor needs to attend the AGM. So in the minutes of the AGM, the presence of the auditor is important. So when you verify minutes of your AGM, then the attendance is important as to who all were present. So you'll have directors present, you may have shareholders present. That register minutes should also write that the auditor or his representative was present. In case you don't want to remain present, then the company has to give you a letter saying that we exempt you from attending the AGM, and that also will be in the minutes, that the company has exempted the auditor from attending the AGM. So what we advise most of the firms is, in your engagement letter itself, you write that we exempt you from attending the annual general meetings if you are not having circumstances where you can attend. So include this in the engagement letter. You will not forget later on to take a separate letter. And even after taking this in the engagement letter, you are anyway free to go and attend the AGM which is there. Let me tell you again, this also applies to private limited companies, because if you are not attending a private limited company AGM, which is not held, everyone says it's on paper, so where do I attend? The minutes is the proof whether you have attended or not. So your minutes should bring out that you have attended the AGM. Joint audits. Recently, of course, RBI has said that all banks and NBFCs over a particular size need joint auditors. But before even that, before 4 years or before this 3 years, you also had this FDI policy which said that in case there is a foreign investment in a company and the shareholder agreement says that as part of the investment, the auditor firm or the audit firm should have an international network. This FDI guideline says then this company should mandatorily have a joint audit where one of the audit firms should not be part of the same network which is there as such. Now, this is something which we need to tell all our clients who get this foreign investment, that yes, you can appoint a bigger firm as the auditors, but simultaneously you also need a joint auditor to be appointed in terms of this FDI policy which is there. The bigger firms are aware of this policy, but they don't tell this to the company or the investor who comes in, because otherwise they will have to keep someone as a joint auditor. So please bring this to the notice of all your clients who are likely to get this foreign investments into their companies as a shareholding, or as we call PE investment, which is there. So this is just the basic things, the initial things before you even get appointed as an auditor. What are the precautions you should take, and what are some of the issues which we have really observed over the last 5-6 years, when auditors unnecessarily get caught into some litigation or some regulatory action just because they have not followed some of those provisions. Let's come to audit reporting as per Companies Act, which, as we have said, is section 143, 15 subsections. Of this 15 subsections, you have got these 3 subsections which are 143(1), 3F and 3H, where the reporting is to be done only if the observations are adverse or negative. This is something similar to that earlier reporting, where we used to report only things were in the negative in the Companies Act 1956. In all other cases, you need to report even if it is positive or negative which is there. Now, why am I saying this? I am saying this because if the reporting is necessary only if the observations are adverse or negative, in most cases we have seen the audit firms ignore even looking at those subsections, because it is never there in the earlier year, because you don't report in the earlier year because there was nothing negative or adverse in the earlier year. You just carry on that report of the earlier year, and therefore you forget looking at these 3 subsections where you need to look at it every year and report if there is something adverse or negative which is there. Now, which are one of this 3 subsection? One is this 143(1). So you make inquiries and report only if the answer is in the negative or adverse. Similar to what was there earlier. I'm not repeating this, but please be careful to look at this whenever you are issuing any audit report. If any of this is negative, you need to report this. Otherwise, you don't need to do anything. Say, for instance, take this C thing which is there. In C, it is there if the company is not an investment or a banking company, and if you have got investments which are shares or debentures and they are sold at a price less than at which they are purchased, which means they are sold at a loss, you need to report. So if I have got shares of, or say even mutual fund investments which I am selling at a loss, it will require you to report under this particular sub-clause. In normal circumstances, you don't report, but if there is a loss, then you will need to report under this particular clause which is there. Okay. So these are some other things also which are part of that 143 subsection 1. Then when you come to section 143(2), here what is important is, and I'm not reading everything because these are already known to you, these are what we always report. The report shall take into account the provisions of the Act, the accounting and auditing standards. So you can see here it talks about auditing standards clearly. There is another reference also down the line on auditing standards, but you can see this 143(2) also refers to auditing standards. And it also says that if there is any order made under subsection 11, that order under subsection 11 is CARO. You need to report on that particular thing which is there. And the financial statements have to give a true and fair view of the state of company's affairs for the profit and loss and cash flow. Cash flow, if I can tell you, is almost mandatory in all cases, all companies, except maybe those small companies where there is some exemption given for a cash flow statement. 143(3). The auditor's report shall also state whether he has sought and obtained all information and explanations, whether in his opinion proper books of accounts as required by law have been kept. Now, why am I saying this B thing? This B thing is important because if you see the corresponding section 129 on books of accounts, it says that proper books of accounts are said to be maintained if the backup of those books are on an IP address which is located in India. Now, in almost all cases, you have a financial accounting package, and in many cases, the books are kept on the cloud. They are not really stored physically anywhere, they are on the cloud. and there is an IP address through which you can access the books of accounts which are on the cloud, which are there. Now, in case your books of accounts are on the cloud and the IP address is not located in India, then the books of accounts are not properly maintained. So if you are doing audit of, say, just to give you a name, say doing the audit of a branch of, say, Google, the cloud where the records of Google are stored will definitely be outside India. In that case, proper books of accounts are not maintained. So if you are, I'm not saying that Google does not comply to with this. They also obviously will have a mirror backup in India, but there are a lot of companies who are subsidiaries of foreign companies or have a foreign connection where the cloud, where the IP address of the cloud is there is not located in India. Now, in all such cases, you cannot say that this clause is complied with. And if you report that it is complied with, and down the line, if some action is taken by the ROC against the company, then you are equally in a problem because you have not even bothered to verify where is the IP address located, whether it is in India or outside India in that sense. And you have that last is E, whether the financial statements comply with the accounting standards. And all of us are very careful on complying with accounting standards, but a lot of us are not very careful in seeing whether we comply with the auditing standards. Now 143 3F, the observations or comments of auditors which have any adverse effect on the functioning of the company. Now, this is a clause which, when it came, the institute came out with a guidance note. A lot of us have forgotten that guidance which they have given as to in which cases when we say that it has an adverse effect on the functioning of a company. So if there is merely a revocation of a license, does it mean adverse effect on functioning? May not be necessary. But if there is any going concern, yes, it could be a effect on the functioning of the company which is there as such. So please have a look at the guidance note to decide whether if you give any observation or comments, can it have any impact on the functioning of a company as such. Now, a lot of people come and say since last year that this COVID-19 has resulted in a lot of difficulty for the company. They have no orders or whatever. Now, does that have an adverse effect on functioning of the company? That directly will not have, because you are not putting those comments in your audit report in that sense. Now, that has an indirect bearing because that will result in a going concern evaluation. And if the going concern evaluation is not proper, then obviously it can have an impact on the adverse functioning of a company. Then any qualification reservation, again relating to maintenance of accounts and other matters. Again, there is a guidance note which is there. And again, you need to refer to what are these books of accounts. Now, if you again read that section 129, it says that, and 128, it says that proper books of accounts are not maintained if the company does not follow accrual system of accounting. Now, a company says that I want to account for gratuity on cash basis. You will say that, okay, you are violating one accounting standard, say AS 15, which is there on employee benefits. So I will just qualify that the accounting standard is not followed, AS 15. Now you should also remember at that point in time that since AS 15 is not followed, the company is not following accrual method, and therefore even this section 128 is violated. And therefore a qualification will even come under this particular clause 143H. 143(3)H also you will have to give some adverse remarks which are there. So if accrual is not followed by the company, your qualification comes at multiple places. You are saying that it does not give true and fair. You are saying it does not follow accrual method, and you will also say that it does not comply with the accounting standards which are applicable to the company per se. 143 you have this clause 143(3)I, which obviously we are now very familiar with, reporting on adequacy of internal financial controls, IFC as we call it. Now, internal financial controls are defined in section 144, and in the first year, a lot of people had a concern, how will I verify this? Am I competent to verify this? Over years, people are just now blindly copying that everything is in order. I don't know whether people even have in their audit checklist now that I have looked at the financial controls of the company and whether I can report that everything is in place. The institute has of course issued a guidance note on this and the format in which you issue your reports. But be careful of this, because in a lot of cases we have seen that in spite of a clean report on IFC, there have been serious problems in the company, including frauds which have happened. In spite of that, people have, or auditors have commented that yes, the company has an adequate internal financial control which is there. Then you have this. This is same on internal financial controls, where you have a guidance note, and in 17 an amendment had come where they said that you only refer to the internal financial controls with respect to financial statements and not on each and every internal functioning of the company in that sense. Then you have got J, which talks of other matters which need to be reported. Now in this, there was a change which came on 24th March 21, and it said with effect from 1st April 21. Clause D was there, which is omitted, and that was regarding those specified bank notes on which reporting was done in the year when demonetization came in. So that is rightly omitted. Whether management, and then clause E and F are new clauses. Clause E has 3 sub-clauses, E1, E2 and E3. I have just reproduced here a short para from that. Whether management is represented that no funds have been advanced with an understanding that the intermediaries will lend, invest in other entities on behalf of ultimate beneficiaries. So this is a new clause where auditors need to report that whether the company has given any funds to anyone with a clear understanding that ultimately the funds will go to the final ultimate beneficiaries. Now this is popularly called evergreening of loans, which really is a word coined after that ILFS scam came out in the open as such. So if the management has given any such funds, it needs to be written in the notes to accounts. And if it is not written in the notes to accounts, then obviously the auditor will have to report here under this clause. And then it has to also write whether dividend declared or paid is in compliance with section 123 of the Act. Now that's a straightforward reporting, but that clause E is a new reporting which is or can create problems, especially when you are doing audit of a finance company or NBFC or some similar entity. If you are doing audit of a manufacturing company, this is not very often likely to come up, because manufacturing companies normally don't give loans to anyone with the idea that again it should come back to me or something. Now we saw what is D, E and F. What is this G? Now G is whether the company has used any as such accounting software for maintaining books which has a feature of recording audit trail, and the same has been operated throughout the year for all transactions recorded in the software, and the audit trail has not been tempered and the audit trail has been preserved by the company as per statutory requirements. Now this was suddenly out of the blue that came, and it clearly said that if your tally has a feature where you are able to go and make changes whenever, wherever possible, and there is no trail of what changes are happening, then that software is not usable for the company. You have to use a software which can keep a trail of all your transactions, whether changes are made, what is the source document, and so on. There was a big hue and cry that on 24th March, when you come up with such an amendment, how can a company follow this immediately? So they said that whether the company in respect of financial years commencing on or after 1st April 22 has used such accounting software and so forth, where it has a feature of recording audit trail. Now G therefore clearly applies only from 22-23 onwards. Now having made this change in 1st April, that it is now April 22 onwards, by implication, my view is that D and E and F are automatically applicable. So because this change was made with effect from April 22, my view is that the earlier 3 changes, and I'll take you back to the earlier slide, this D, E and F are automatically applicable for reporting for the year ended 31st March 21, because they are effective from 1st April 21, and an audit report, to my understanding, is a report given on a day, and on that day whatever is applicable in the section needs to be reported. This is unlike a schedule 3 which we will see later on, where I see the year end. Here I am not really supposed to look at the year end. Now, there are other views which have been propagated even by maybe some of the council members that this is not applicable for reporting for March 21, but our view in our office and my view personally is that this also will be applicable for 31st March 2021. So be careful whether applicable or not applicable. In any case, as I tell people, if you are sure that the company doesn't really have a problem in giving you all this information, please go ahead and report. There is nothing wrong in reporting something extra rather than take a chance and if the MCA tomorrow comes up with some notice or something. So I will go forward. Then 143.4, whether any matters required to be included if they are answered in negative, you have to give the reasons therefore. If you write anything in negative, please give the reasons why you are giving something adverse or negative. You don't have to give anything in thick type or bold now. You just have to give the reasons for it. 143.5, 6 and 7 are reporting to CAG by the auditors. So doesn't apply to all companies. It applies only to public sector undertakings. 143.8 is for branch auditors. So if you're doing audit of a branch, then this reporting applies. Doesn't apply to banks in that sense because banks follow the RBI formats. They don't strictly follow the Companies Act. But if you're doing audit of maybe a private sector bank and you're doing audit of a branch of a private sector, then you will still need to report under this to the main auditors and the company. Then 143.9 and 10 is very specific about complying with auditing standards. And we saw that right on 143.2 also, it's talking of auditing standards. Two more sections which directly talks about complying with auditing standards. And this is the clause which NFRA takes up and says that there is a direct requirement to comply with auditing standards. And if you have not done anything, then we will hold you responsible for it. Now, NFRA is very strict on this. And if you see the two reports which NFRA has issued on audit quality reviews, they have said that even the compliance with auditing standards of those two firms, which happen to be very big firms, their documentation and their compliance with some of the auditing standards has been inadequate. That is what NFRA has commented in the audit quality review reports of even those two big audit firms who were doing the audit of ILFS and one of their subsidiaries. Now they are available in public domain on the NFRA website. So go to NFRA website and see these orders. You will see how strict they are on interpreting and adherence to the standards on auditing which are there. 143.11 is on CARO 16. Obviously, you all know CARO 16. We have been reporting this since now maybe 6-7 years. This is the threshold given for private limited companies. We need to see the threshold. If you don't cross the threshold, you don't report under CARO 16. But there are some clauses under CARO where I believe that people are not reporting in the best manner. So though there are 16 items which you report, I have highlighted only the 7 or 8 items which are there. Fixed asset related, something which I am sure you understand when I write itself the word. Lot of people report that the company maintains a fixed asset register, though in practice, many companies don't maintain a fixed asset register. I have no clue as to why auditors don't report here the factual thing that there is no fixed asset register. Most of the time when we ask them, they come up and say that last year I had reported that there was a register. So this year, how can I say there is no register? Now, what we advise them is that, okay, last year you have reported. That doesn't mean that every year you report something wrong. So this year you at least say that the fixed asset register needs to be updated for all additions and other adjustments during the year. Once you start writing like this, after 2-3 years, you can automatically say that there is no fixed asset register maintained because a fixed asset register needs to be updated in that sense. Similarly, we have found a lot of lacuna in reporting in CARO 16 on loans to related parties, whether any loans are covered under 185, 186. And a lot of these clauses, you can find comments by FRRB when they review audit reports, they find a lot of lacuna in the reporting by the audit firms on some of these clauses. Deposits under section 73. One of the important things under section 73 is I may not be taking any deposits. However, if I have got customer advances which are outstanding for more than 360 days and that customer is a non-corporate entity, then I violate section 73 because I get an exemption only for inter-corporate amounts which I have received. If I have received a loan, not a loan, but advance from a customer which is over 360 days, the rules say that it amounts to a deposit covered under Section 73. And if a deposit is covered under Section 73 and you have not complied with the provisions, that company cannot even declare dividend. So then if you have violated Section 73, you automatically also violate that Section 123 where dividends are paid. And now if you see that earlier, that's a specific reporting which comes in that Rule 11 changes which have come, whether you have complied with the payment of dividend clauses which are there. Now this is a clause. The next one, advance tax, GST, shortfall, etc. may need to be reported. Now there is one clause in CARO about timely payment of provident fund dues, which we are very sure we take the challans and verify everything. Even 1 day delay we say has been fairly regular and such things. But we sometimes miss out on these undisputed taxes. Now what is undisputed taxes? Undisputed taxes does not necessarily mean litigation. It also means whether you have paid your advance tax on time, whether there is a GST which you are delaying or something. So take a simple case. You have a company which is a profitable company. It does not pay advance tax in June and September, but pays the entire advance tax in the month of March. Or doesn't pay advance tax at all, only pays asset tax when it files its return. Now this is something where the company is a profitable company. Advance tax is an undisputed tax because clearly it has shown profits. If I don't report that advance tax which was due was not paid by the company for more than 6 months, I am not doing a proper reporting under CARO 16. So your advance tax shortfalls, your GST shortfalls, they are all undisputed taxes, and if they remain unpaid for more than 6 months, you need to be reported. So for advance tax, maybe the June and September installments will become relevant because then only it becomes more than 6 months. December installment, if I don't pay, that's fine because there that 6-month period doesn't get satisfied till 31st March. Then on the other things also, FRRB has raised a lot of issues on whether the auditors are correctly reporting under all the other things. Now, even on the fraud, you will see in the next slides on fraud. Fraud is to be reported under CARO 16. There is a reporting on fraud even under the next clause which is there under 143.12. So if there is a fraud under 143.12 direct reporting, there is a threshold here of 1 crore rupees, and this is what the auditor comes up in his course of audit about a fraud to be reported under 143.12. So he has to first tell the company or the audit committee and then even report this to the central government in that sense. But there is a difference between the fraud which you report under clause 12 of CARO 16 and a fraud which you report under 143.12 of the Companies Act. And these are some distinctions which we have drawn out, that what do you report under clause 12 of CARO and what do you report under 143.12 of the Companies Act 2013. So please refer to this whenever you are reporting on some fraud. And fraud, you may believe, is a very occasional event, but nowadays you may find that a lot of companies have to file FIRs with the police where someone has stolen cash from the company, someone has taken away some assets from the company and so on. And we have seen companies in south of India which are, say, companies who deal in jewelry, companies who deal in loans against jewelry. In almost all such cases, no, there is a fraud which is reported by the company. So fraud is not something which is very occasional. It may be there in a lot of companies, especially if there is a financing involved or a loan company or whatever. And be clear as to what is the reporting on fraud under 143.12 and under clause 12 of CARO. Under 143.12, of course, the threshold is very high of 1 crore rupees, but under clause 12 of CARO, there is no threshold. Every fraud needs to be reported. Then you have these last 3 sections of 143.13, which is just saying that you can, if you do something in good faith, no one can take action against you. 143.14, all these clauses on fraud also apply to a cost accountant or company secretary. And 143.15, where fraud, this is the punishment for the fraud which you commit in that sense. So these were the provisions of that Companies Act, which really tells you how do you report. what are the points under which you report under that clause 143 of the Companies Act, subclauses 1 to subclauses 15 which are there. And if you miss out anything over there, please remember, not only the institute can take action, even the ministry or the registrar of companies can start taking action against you for not reporting properly under those subclauses of section 143. So please spend some time in an audit report. We spend a lot of time on audit. We do not spend time on drafting an audit report. Now that is very poor. It's something like a doctor does a surgery which is an excellent surgery, but he does not do a good job when he is finishing off the whole thing or sewing up the patient in that sense. So that entire thing will be lost if you don't do that final reporting, which is a main thing which really goes to the public, the government, and the regulators who are there. Let's go to the next thing, which is audit reporting under provisions of standards on auditing. Now, these are the standards on auditing which are there, and take a look at these standards on auditing. And if you can just take a look and see how many standards of auditing are issued. If you see the numbers in brackets, that really tell you how many standards of auditing are there. If you total them up, they will come to 45 standards of auditing. And I am sure that a lot of members who are hearing here, and I can see almost 400 plus people who are there. Out of that 400, I do not know how many of the members present were aware that there are 45 standards on auditing which are there as such. The students know this better because they read this for their exams, or maybe the fresh chartered accountants will know this better. But I believe all of us should know this standards on auditing quite well, because that's the direct reporting which we are doing, or the compliance which we are required to do as per the Companies Act. Now, since we are talking only about reporting, these are the ones which are highlighted is only one which we are going to discuss today. So SA 700 to SA 799. And this is a series of standards. There are not standards. So 99 standards are not issued, but they have got this series. So in future, whenever a new standard comes on reporting, it will be added within that series which is there. And that is why you have got this aggregation which is there. And this is the international way in which standards on auditing are issued. Internationally, instead of SA, they are called ISA, which is International Standard on Auditing. Now, we are therefore concerned with these 6 standards which are part of this 700 to 799 series, and they are having a heading called Audit Conclusions and Reporting, which is there. So whatever is highlighted there are the new standards which came before 3 years. They started from April 18. So the first year when we reported all that was in 18-19, then 19-20. This is the 3rd year when those standards are being applied for reporting. Now, if I summarize these standards, what is given there in the brackets are the SA numbers. So if you have issue audit reports, you can have clean audit reports. For that, your formats are given in SA 700. If you need modified audit reports, you can see the red over there because they are modified and they are dangerous audit reports in that sense. There you follow SA 705. In a modified audit report, there are 3 ways in which you can modify. You can have a qualified report, a disclaimer report, or an adverse report. Everything of that is given in SA 705, which is there. If you issue a clean report, you can also give in a clean report something what we now call emphasis of matter or other matters. And for that, how do you report this emphasis of matter or other matters? All that is given in SA 706. So basically, you refer 700, 705, and 706 for most of your audit reports. If, however, you are reporting a listed company, then you will also need to report under SA 701, which is this key audit matters. Now, in audit reports which are there, the applicable standards, now SA 700 is really called the umbrella standard, as we call it. This is the main standard for auditing. That standard always has to be used. That will be linked to some of the other standards which are there. You may need to refer 701, 705, even sometimes SA 570 when you are reporting on going concern. You will have to also refer to 720 when you are reporting under some other information which comes in. So there is a linkage between that SA700 and all some of these other standards which are there. But SA700 is really called the umbrella standard or the mother of all your reporting which is done in a company audit report. Now see some of the changes which came since the last 3 years. Earlier you had an SA700 which was at that point in time. Now you have SA700 revised which applies from 1819, and you can see the auditor's opinion goes up. Going concern is a mandatory paragraph. Key audit matters comes in for mainly listed companies. Management responsibility statement, auditor's responsibility. Though it was also there earlier, the format now in this revised 700 adds on a lot many items which is now part of management responsibility and auditor's responsibility which is there. And after all this, the institute has from last year added this UDIN requirement. So after all this, obviously you are also going to add a UDIN for all your audit reports which you are issuing. Now some commonly observed errors in audit reports which we again find through our interaction with other firms and also what FRRB has observed is something like this. There is a lot of confusion between what is modified reports and what is clean reports. So as I showed you earlier in a chart, your reports clearly has to be distinguished like this. So a clean report will not have any comments except maybe a EOM or other matters. And a modified report will have to have one of these three things, either qualified, disclaimer or adverse. A qualified report just says subject to so and so, everything else is proper. A disclaimer says that your accounts we are not able to comment because we have not got all the information, so it's disclaiming something. Adverse is the worst form of audit report where you say that the accounts do not show a true and fair view in that sense. All three together are called modified reports. So what are modified reports? What are clean reports? Please be very clear. As I said, what are qualifications? What are disclaimers? What are adverse opinions? You need to be clear. Lot of professionals come up and say that instead of a modified opinion, let me issue an emphasis of matter. Now that is not possible because a modification means something wrong is done, whereas the emphasis of matter only means that everything is right, but I only want to draw your emphasis on a particular matter which is a little different of a different type. So a modification and a EOM are not interchangeable. So if you want to give a modified report, you have to give a modified report. You cannot say that a modification I will convert to an emphasis of matter in that sense. And both whether a modification or emphasis of matter has to be self-explanatory. And if you modify your audit report, which means you either give a qualification or disclaimer or something, then there is a section in your audit report which is on other legal and regulatory requirements that also will need to be modified. And I give you examples of that in case my accrual system is not followed, not only will I give a qualification of not following that particular gratuity or something, I will also have to say that section 129 is violated and accounting standards are also not fulfilled. So that portion of the audit report will also need to be modified. Caro reporting should be very specific and not vague. So in Caro, you cannot write that as per information made available by the management. You will have to be specific that as verified by us. Don't put very generic things in Caro. The institute as well as the ROC does not like reporting very vague things in Caro. Even ICFR should be specific, and ICFR, if you see the institute's guidance, cannot even continue or contain a EOM or an OM, but you can have a modification in a ICFR report which is there. 701, again a new standard on auditing, which as we said applies from April 18. It is mandatory only for listed companies, but other unlisted companies can also follow this. What is this key audit matter? And to understand key audit matter, you will have to read 260 to 265, 315. So in audit, I have a lot of important things which I verify and I inform that to the directors or the audit committee or the management. Now they are called matters communicated to those charged with governance. So say for instance, there are 7-8 items which I found important on maybe inventory, on depreciation, on revenue recognition or whatever, and I discussed that with the management or those charged with governance. Now, out of those 7 or 8 items, I find that there are some items which are significant because they are little of higher risk which is there. So maybe in a real estate company, I may find revenue recognition to be of a very high significant risk which is there. So that will be funneled down, that will be brought down from that 7 or 8 matters to maybe just 1 or 2 matters which are important from an auditor's perspective as described under SA 315. Now, out of those 2 or 3, something which is the most important will become what is called a key audit matter which is there. So my audit team comes up with 7, 8 items. I bring it down to maybe 2 or 3 items. And finally, after discussion with the management, I say that these 1 or 2 items are most important, which I will call them as key audit matters. Key audit matters are not qualifications. They are only drawing extra attention of the shareholders or of the regulators that these are important things, or the highest risk in the entire company belongs to this particular items which are there. So key audit matters in fact has improved the working papers of auditors, because if I show something as a key audit matter, I need very clear backup papers as to why am I showing something as a key audit matter in that sense. If you look at the institute last year or September 19 on section 197(16), there was an amendment which said that auditor has to report under section 143 about compliance with 197. So the institute said that please report this separately under section 143, though you are also reporting this under CARO. So if a company, there is also CARO reporting applicable, compliance of 197 is reported at 2 places. Once under 197(16), which is reported under 143, and once again it is reported under the CARO 2016, which is there. Last year, after this lockdown came, the institute started coming out with a lot of advisories on how do you do audit and financial reporting because of this COVID-19 and lockdowns. Everyone thought that's the one-time thing because it will apply only for that year. Now, coincidentally, all this also applies to this year, because this year also we are in a little similar situation, not little similar, in fact, we are in a little worse situation, though everyone says there is no total lockdown. The situation is quite grave outside, and all this automatically therefore become applicable this year also. So have a look at all these advisories which are issued. Almost all the advisories tell you about following the standards on auditing properly. So going concern tells you about that SA 570. Physical inventory is all on documentation or the sampling which is there. Auditors reporting, key audit considerations is all under SA 700. Subsequent events is all again on that SA 570 on subsequent events which are there. So please have a look at all these advisories again. Last year, obviously, we had a look. We will again need to look at this because they have not really become outdated, because the situation has repeated itself this year also. Now, you must be reading that there is an amendment which has come to Schedule 3, which came in March 21. Now, these are the amendments which came in Schedule 3. So it came in all the 3 divisions: Division 1, which is non-Ind AS, Division 2, which is Ind AS, and also in Division 3, which is for NBFCs. Now, these changes which have come are far-reaching. For instance, if you see, one of the first thing is you need a mandatory rounding off now. Then you need promoter shareholdings to be given. Then the aging analysis has to be given into multiple buckets which are there, both for payables and for receivables. Then the end use of the borrowings needs to be taken. Whether my charges are registered and satisfied needs to be written separately. If I go on the asset side, CWIP aging needs to be given. Trade receivables, again, bucket-wise analysis needs to be given. Ultimate beneficiaries of loans to be given. Reconciliation of quarterly returns with the banks and books. Loans to related parties. Various ratios are to be given. CSR related some extra disclosure. Cryptocurrencies, if you have invested, that needs to be given. The moot point is whether all these disclosures are applicable for 31st March 21. Now, unlike the view which I held earlier when the audit reporting was being discussed in that Rule 11 which got changed, the reasoning here why I believe this is not applicable on 31st March 21 is something like this. So most disclosures are aligned to CARO 2020, which is now really effective from March 22. So CARO 2020 is now actually what we call it as CARO 2022. Now, technically, financial statements are drawn to comply with laws and formats applicable up to the date of financial statements, that is 31st March 21. So when I am drawing up my financial statements, my balance sheet, profit and loss for a year, I have to follow the formats which are applicable on the last day of my reporting, which is 31st March 21. And all these changes, if you see, are with effect from 1st April 2021. So if I am drawing up a balance sheet up to 31st March, I have to do a format of 31st March. However, if my year ending is something else, say my year ending is 30th June, then I will definitely need to follow the new format which is there. If I look at some of the companies which have declared results for 2021, typically your Infosys and TCS, they have not given these disclosures, which means those companies and their auditors have also accepted that this is not applicable for 2021. Now, because of all this, but that comparable of other companies is not something which we would blindly follow, irrespective of the size of the company who does it. The earlier three reasons which are there is what makes me believe that this is not applicable for really 2021 balance sheet reporting. But even if it is applicable from next year, please tell the company to start making the disclosures, because from next year the comparative information will in any case need to be given. That there is no exemption from giving the previous year's figures, even if you are going to apply this from the next year. Then this is an announcement which the institute issued on the last day. Maybe the institute felt if the ministry is giving so many things, let us also do something and inform all the members of some changes. And the institute came up with an announcement on 31st March 21, and they said effective date is 1st April 20. So it means that it applies for 2021 reporting. Now earlier, if you know, the institute had earlier given that there are different levels of companies, level of entities, and this is mainly for non-company entities. So non-corporate entities as they are called. Earlier you had got three levels, and depending on the level of the entity, the institute had said that some accounting standards will apply, or they would not apply, or there would be concessions. Now the institute has said that instead of three, let us go to 4 levels. So now you have got level 1, level 2, level 3, and whoever is not covered in these 3 levels automatically become level 4 entities, which is given there as a line below the table which is there. Now, what are the criteria which they have given? It is a criteria which is a combination of turnover or borrowings. So level 1 are the larger companies, 250 crores, over 250 crores, or borrowings over 50 crores. Level 2 is 50 to 250 and borrowings 10 to 50. Level 3 is 10 to 50, turnover and borrowings 2 to 10 crores. Now, if you are having a turnover less than 10 crores or borrowing less than 2 crores, then you will get covered into level 4 entities. The institute is trying to link this up with that new micro, small, medium and enterprises, where there are similar limits which are there, especially on the turnover side which is there. Now, this is something you will need to be careful for non-corporate entities audits, because this is applicable for 2021, all audits which are done for 2021. So if you are doing tax audits of a partnership firm, you will have to follow this new announcement of the institute which has come in. Now these are the exemptions which are applicable. So you have got level 1 entities who have to comply with everything. Level 1, no exemptions, they are called bigger companies, but level 2, 3 and 4 get some exemptions. Now, I am not going to read the entire list because this is already marked here. Whatever is marked with the X is not applicable to that level of entity. So for instance, cash flow statement is not applicable to level 2, 3 and 4. Earlier for level 2 and 3, it was optional, but now it is not applicable at all. If I look at AS10, for level 2 applicable, but for level 3 applicable with some exemption of disclosure, and so is the case for level 4 which is there. And the standard numbers are the standards which are issued by the institute, because this we are really talking about non-company entities and not corporate entities. So you will have this AS numbering from 1 to 29 which will come. So this is taking that list further. Segment reporting not applicable to anyone. Earlier it was optional, but now not applicable. If you see related party disclosures for level 3, they are not applicable now. Earlier they were applicable for level 3, but now related party disclosures not applicable for level 3 and also for level 4 which are there. So institute has used some logic in deciding what are the disclosures, what are the standards which are applicable to these different levels of entities which are there. Okay, so this is right up to AS 29. And besides this, there are some paragraphs where some exemptions are given. So if I look at AS 10, paragraph 87, it is exempt in level 2, but applicable in level 3 and level 4. So these are again some fine tuning things which they have done on where things are applicable or not applicable in that sense. Now this is an announcement by the institute which was done on 31st March 21. It has not been given a lot of publicity, but clearly this applies, and please make sure that you apply this carefully. Then you must be reading that a lot of changes have been made on CSR in the last year by the Companies Act. Now, because of the changes which have been made under CSR which was earlier called voluntary, because there was no punishment or penalties on CSR, now it has become mandatory. Because now the Companies Act, the changes to section 135 and the rules say that in case you have not spent on CSR, which you are required to under section 135 and the rules, you have to deposit that money in a separate bank account and ultimately to the government. And if you are not complying with those things, there is a penalty applicable for non-compliance, and the penalties are fairly stiff. The penalties range from even 5 lakhs to 50 lakhs, and not only the directors and the company, even the officers who are not complying will need to pay those penalties. Now, because of this shift from voluntary to mandatory, some things which you need to look at when you are reporting for March 21 is any provision necessary for unspent amount. Now, till last year, since CSR was voluntary, there was no provision needed. So if a company had to spend 100 rupees and it had spent only 80 rupees, that 20 rupees, I was not making a provision because there was no penalty for not spending that remaining 20 rupees. Or if some company says that I will see when the government comes out with some rules, only then I will spend, otherwise I will not spend on CSR, the entire 100 rupees. But we were not making any provision for it because there was no penalty and it was so-called voluntary. Even the institute said that there is no necessity to make a provision for CSR expenditure which is not spent. But now with this CSR becoming mandatory, you will need to make a provision for unspent CSR. And this provision will not only be really required for 2021, it may also be required for amounts not spent in the earlier years, 17, 18, 19 also. So please find out what is the amount unspent on CSR for all the years and ask the company to make a provision for it. Some people say that I don't need to make a provision beyond 2021, but my view is that you will need to make a provision for all items right from the time you have got CSR which has become applicable to the company. When the CSR became mandatory, the other thing which the amendment says is instead of 100, say in the last year you have spent 120. So you have spent something more, you have spent something excess. The government says that if you have spent less, we will penalize you. However, at the same time, if you have spent something excess, we will allow you to adjust it in the next year. So if I have spent 120 instead of 100, I can carry forward that 20 and spend that much less in the next year. Now that is also allowed under that new rules or new section 135. Now just as therefore I need to make a provision for unspent amount, I will need to create an asset for the excess spending which I do in the earlier years. And this is something like a prepaid expenditure for which you will have to create an asset in your books. So on CSR, if out of 100 you have spent 100, fine, nothing to be done. But out of 100 you have spent 90, provide for 10. If instead of 100 I have spent 120, create an asset for the excess 20 which I have spent. Of course, the directors have to be told that if you want to adjust the excess, then you have to pass appropriate resolutions. Only then I can pass an entry for it. With all those procedures to be complied with, you need to make a provision for unspent amount as well as entry for the excess spending by creating an asset. All this automatically has an implication on provision for tax, because some CSR is allowable under tax, some CSR is not allowable under tax. So automatically this will have an implication on your provision for tax. Now, under CSR, a lot of companies say that I will give money to another NGO rather than spending it myself. Now, the issue which arises under these new laws is whether when I give this money to another NGO and that NGO has not spent the money up to the balance sheet date, how do I report in my audit report which is there? Now, you'll have to look at the rules for this, because there are timelines given as to when the amount will need to be spent by the other entity. It also depends whether the NGO is in-house or whether it is an outside NGO. But some reporting or some detailing will need to be looked into this, and some disclosures will definitely apply on amount given to another NGO and not spent up to the balance sheet date for that particular project which is there. Now, some actual auditing aspects, not just on reporting, but on actual auditing which is there. Now, because of this continued lockdown and the COVID impact, these are the things which you really need to focus on again for March 21. We did focus on this even for March 20, but even for March 21, you will need to focus on this. And two things which I have highlighted there are subsequent events and going concern. The other things I'm sure you are anyway going to look at it, but going concern is something you clearly need to look at it, because some companies can have a lot of difficulty going forward if their businesses are affected because of this lockdown. Take for instance a travel agency, take for instance a restaurant, a hotel industry, especially if they have got borrowings. If they have got borrowings, then again they may be really impacted. Subsequent events can have a huge role to play, and that SA 570 you need to really look at closely. And I'll give you a simple example. You are doing the audit of a company or say a restaurant which has got perishable items on 31st March 21. On 31st March, they are usable because you can use them to manufacture food or whatever. On 1st April also they are usable. But on 1st April, there is a lockdown. There is a lockdown right till the end of April, which is there. And the items can be used only say in the first week of May after the lockdown lifts. At that time, they are not usable because they are perishable items. So my subsequent event, what do I consider? Do I consider the quality of that item or the usability of that item on 1st April? Or do I consider it as on 30th April or first week of May, when I am really signing off that balance sheet or something? Now you will need to look at such things when you are doing audit for again the March 21 which is there. Again, you may have some work from home related scope limitations. It should be less than last year, but again this year inventory verification may not have been possible in a lot of cases. Again, when it comes to property, plant, equipment, financial instruments, is there a impairment which is necessary for all my assets which are there? Revenue recognition, cutoff dates. When I have got goods ready in my factory and I am not able to shift it outside the factory, how do I really apply my cutoff dates? My goods have left the factory, but again there is a immediate lockdown which is there. The goods are stuck on the road for say 15 days because of the lockdown. The state in which my delivery was to be made, that state is not allowing anything because of the lockdown. So what is my cutoff date to recognize the revenue? All these things you will clearly need to look at, because these are impacts coming because of this COVID-19 or your lockdown situations which are there per se. So I think that should cover a lot of things which I wanted to discuss with you today. Let me also tell you that last week on 30th April, I took a session at Bombay Chartered Accountants Society, where besides these changes, a lot of other changes in the Companies Act, then maybe in the GST law, maybe in the Reserve Bank of India guidelines. I did discuss in that session at Bombay Chartered Accountants Society. That session is recorded and available on YouTube, and the presentation which I took there is also available on the BCA website. So if you are interested in even getting something more than what we are discussing today, or a lot of other changes on other laws which apply for March 21 other than just audit reporting, please, you can always go to YouTube and the BCA website to have a look at that particular presentation. Otherwise, I think this is my last slide, and something which I tell my office people is also that auditing is becoming onerous. We need to bridge these three perceived gaps. There is a knowledge gap because a lot of changes happen and we need to bridge the gap. Performance gap, we can do much better audit than what we are currently doing, and we have to show to the regulators, especially the NFRA and the ministry, that we are doing a thorough job. And the evaluation gap, a lot of people believe that we are not evolving as auditors, we are still doing that vouching, posting and so on. We need to bridge that gap and evolve to do a good sampling, data analysis and so on. And finally, what I tell people is, please report findings as they are and not what the management wants. If you only do this, then you have a good audit report. Otherwise, your audit report is not what you should be really giving if you follow what the management wants. But please report findings as you find them. Don't forget that is your main bread and butter of your profession. So I think that should be the last thing. So thank you for this. If there are any questions, yes, we can take some of them. I'll stop sharing the screen.
I'll just share it from my end, sir. 1 minute.
Yeah.
So I think the screen sharing has stopped, right?
Yes, stop,
Yes,
sir.
sir.
I'll
Yes, sir.
share my.
Stop, sir.
Yeah, okay. Okay.
Is my screen visible?
Yes, it's visible.
Yes, sir. Almost we have 30 questions, sir.
Okay. Oh, is it?
Whatever possible way.
All right.
Discuss.
Fine. So
Yes.
let me see the questions. Normally, when we read FAQs, no, this looks like FAQs. After the question, the answer also comes up, but here there are no answers. Okay. So the first question is, if a company doesn't want to continue with us and are enforcing our resignation, that what should be the reason that we need to provide? You provide a reason that, I mean, you will have to first decide why you want to, are you going to resign or not going to resign? You say that the books of accounts are not proper and we are likely to issue a qualified opinion and therefore we are resigning from this thing. Give the exact reason, no? Don't worry about what the company feels or the client feels, because ultimately your future will be at stake if you just give a resignation saying that preoccupation or no time or something like that. Tell the company I will not resign unless I give a report which is a qualified report, or there is a valid reason as per the institute. Show him the institute guidelines, no? Second, whether reporting under 143F and H is required to be reported when there is a qualified or EOM. It is possible depending on what is the qualified opinion. Depending on that, you will also need to report under F and H, that adverse opinion. I mean, is it adversely functioning, affecting the functioning of the company? Whether a partner who is a registered valuer can undertake valuation if his partner is signatory as auditor of the company. My answer is no. There is a clear conflict. What are the threshold limits for complying with AS 15 for obtaining actuarial valuation? Now, AS 15 per se will have no limits. These limits which we saw is only for non-corporate entities. So, but typically, if it is not material, you may not take an actuarial valuation. So typically, we say that if you are less than 20 employees, you can do an estimate rather than doing a actuarial valuation. But there is no limit. It's a materiality which you really follow there. Why exemption of auditor from attending AGM is available? The exemption is not only for private companies, it is also for public companies. But for public companies, if you don't attend, the shareholders will take an objection, because the public shareholders want auditor also present in a annual general meeting. But the exemption is to everyone, provided the company allows you to not remain present. With regard to undisputed taxes in Caro advance tax, if I applied for exemption under 8i IC, which I am yet to receive, do I still need to report? You will have to see the facts. Finally, if you have applied and you believe that you had a proper reason of not paying advance tax, then fine, then you don't report. But if you are sure that you had to pay advance tax, but you still don't pay, you will need to report under Caro. Please take it up. Yeah, we are on question 6. Whether consent of shorter notice is also to be signed by auditor? No, this is not required. 146, can you comment on attendance of government companies? It applies equally to government companies if they are following the Companies Act. If they are registered under Companies Act, you equally need to go and attend EGM of government companies also. A proprietorship firm can be appointed auditor for only 5 years and cannot be appointed beyond the first term of 5 years. Yeah, as per the recent change which was done by the institute, this seems to be the understanding which comes out. An audit report is signed in anticipation of some documents and the client fails to provide it. How can you sign an audit report in anticipation of documents? That itself is a wrong practice. Afterwards, the auditor is removed by appointing another auditor. What remedy is available? So you will have to withdraw your report. You will have to say that I am withdrawing my report because some information which was given to me is not correct, and therefore I am withdrawing my report. What it can have repercussions on the company, but don't worry about the company. First, worry about yourself. Whether NFRA 2 is mandatory to be filed for private companies, if it is falling under a sector or something which is as per the NFRA rules, then it is mandatory. It is nothing like private or public. You have to see which companies fall under NFRA, and you have to file NFRA 2 for all such companies, whether private or public. If there are matters for qualifications, as well as there are some matters on which we do not get full information leading to disclaimer, how to combine qualified and you cannot combine qualified and disclaimer. When you have a disclaimer, then clearly then you are not getting that information and you clearly disclaim that particular thing. A disclaimer report will not then contain any qualification in that sense, but you can have a qualified report with some other matters which are in emphasis of matter also. Reporting under Caro 16 with respect to liabilities is only recorded in books. Many companies do not record advance tax liability. Whether unrecorded, how can a company not report or record advance tax liability? Your AS 22, which is provision for tax, is not then complied with. No? A company has to provide for tax liability. If you don't provide, that itself is a violation of some accounting standard. A non-corporate entity, you may still come and say that, but a corporate entity has to provide for tax liability. Small private limited company has not submitted books for 1920. Can I resign for this reason? You can resign. You can say that the books are not provided, and obviously you will have to. You can resign, but do give it in the current date. Don't do any backdating when you are resigning, even for 1920. Whether communication by email is sufficient for communication? Yes, the institute has last year come out with some announcement saying that in this COVID and lockdown, email communication is enough. Until that situation continues, email is enough. Once this COVID-19 goes away, which we do not know when it will go away, after that this email may not be enough, but as of now, email is enough. Are private small companies exempt from cash flow statement? Is auditors visit a sign co non even in COVID atmosphere? Can virtual audit substitute the visit? Is it necessary to visit all branches? Now this is for the auditor to decide whether he is getting all information to do the audit, whether he is satisfying all standards on auditing. And that exemption on cash flow, you see the small company limits and then decide whether the exemption applies or do not apply. Private companies are not exempt, only small companies are exempt from cash flow. What are consequences of audit observation that trail is not used? Now we'll have to wait and see what are the consequences, because this applies from 22-23. But obviously, if the auditor says that the accounting trail software is not used, the company will have repercussions, because then a section of the Companies Act is not followed and the ROC can proceed against the company for not following that section of the Companies Act. If a company is maintaining accounts in Tally and taking printouts at the end of each month, can the company claim that accounts are maintained manually so that criteria for audit trail for software is not applicable? What about the changes which are there? If you are doing an audit entirely on the printed books and you are not looking at Tally for a balance sheet or anything, then it may be fine, but otherwise this will not be enough. A producer company, despite legal advice, has chosen to appoint auditors only for 1 year. The auditor should not accept appointment, no? Because the audit appointment has to be for 5 years. Can an auditor CA take up tax audit under Income Tax Act of a private company while he also provides management advisory services? The same section 144 also applies to tax audits, because if you see the section 44 AB, it also says that section 144 is also applicable for an auditor who is appointed under section 44 AB. So if you believe a statutory audit cannot be done, then even a tax audit cannot be done. Is the reporting under 197(16) is only with respect to remuneration paid to directors? Whether reporting is not applicable is paid to KMP other than directors. 197 is only to managerial personnel. So 197(16) is only for remuneration to directors. Non-corporate entities are really governed by ICAI. Is it only for auditors, and does ICAI prescribe audit format for non-corporate entities at different levels? The institute has given a publication in the past as on the format of financial statements for non-corporate entities that is available in the ICAI website. And lot of companies, as you have rightly said, lot of entities, non-corporate, say that accounting standards are not applicable to those entities. It's only for auditors. But you are more concerned as auditors, no? If the firm does not follow the accounting standards or the formats, then you will have to appropriately write in your report. Amendments to Schedule 3 are effective from this and not need be prepared if financials are prepared for June 21. For June 21, it is applicable, no? Because Schedule 3 is applicable on the date of a balance sheet. So if I prepare a balance sheet for June 21, which is my year end, then the new amendments will be applicable. That is what I have said. It doesn't apply for March 21 if your year ending is March, but if your year ending is June 21, it would apply for June 21. Whether UDIN number needs to be included on comfort letters issued for an audit client in any attestation needs a UDIN function. Not really concerned with this presentation today, but what I believe is any attestation function, including internal audits, needs a UDIN number. CSR is a burden on the company, giving employment, providing support, etc., etc. Can a company spend amount by giving fund to schools? I think this is, you have to spend on CSR based on that Schedule 7. If you are covered under Schedule 7, then all these things are possible. Which of CSR expenses are deductible for deduction from income tax? I think you redirect this question to a tax session later on. Whether provision with regard to set off of excess amount is retrospective. I believe it is retrospective. So if you have spent something excess in the last year also, you will be able to carry it forward. We have to open a separate account and deposit unspent CSR, but banks cannot such account due to RBI guidelines. What can be done? I think you just open a separate account and internally designate it as a CSR account. That is not prohibited, no? RBI has nothing to do with it. How to verify and report timely payment to MSME suppliers? So for this, you have to ask the company to keep a track, no? Who are your MSME suppliers? Are they being paid on time? And you'll have to devise audit procedures to do this, because if you don't do this proper reporting, or the company doesn't do proper reporting on this, and an auditor, you are also not looking at it, then both are responsible. The company for not reporting properly and auditor for verifying that it is not reported properly. If a company doesn't account for a disputed liability, should it be reported under amended Schedule 3? Even earlier it was needed to be reported. Forget the new Schedule 3, even earlier you needed to report this. While finalizing accounts for March 21, shall we consider amendments in Schedule 3? I think you have just joined the presentation because we already discussed this. This is not applicable for March 21. That is my view. Many companies have a practice of taking security deposits which are long-term in nature. Will this get covered under Section 73 and does it require reporting under CARO? As normally no Section 73 compliances are done. So if it's a security or caution deposit and doesn't get exempt under that rules, or if it is from a non-corporate entity, then Section 73 will be attracted and you will have to report under CARO. If not, then the company will face action under 73, but you will also face an action for not reporting properly in CARO. Whenever there is a change in management, they ask the auditors to resign because existing auditors are appointed by old management. So you ask the company, to give you a letter saying that we don't want you as auditors. This is all oral. So ask the company to give you a letter to resign with the reasons and use that same letter to give your resignation. That we are resigning because this is a letter given by the management to resign. Then you can resign, but the management has to give you a proper signed letter for this. Should the dispute between shareholders be reported as, what is EM? Emphasis of matter. Shareholder dispute don't come in the company, we are doing audit of the company, so shareholder disputes doesn't come in the reporting at all. Similar to security deposits, there are retention monies held for a period of more than 1 year. Will this attract provisions? It will attract if they are non-corporate customers. A private company which is a wholly owned subsidiary of a listed company and a less than 10 employees, whether actuarial valuation required under Ind AS. Under Ind AS, you will need to be strict and you will need to take actuarial valuation. Some concessions or materiality things which you really apply are only for maybe the accounting standards which are there. But maybe if the holding company and if it is a listed company which is there, then obviously you will have to do actuarial valuation because you cannot have different policies for a holding listed company and the subsidiary. Whether form ADT 3 and ADT 1 is required if previous auditor is signing as auditor and he surrendered. It's a change of audit, because the firm is changing. Your I think your firm number will change, and therefore I believe it's a change of auditor. Because your FRN number will change. Do we need to prepare accounts as per amended Schedule 3 so that it's easier? You only compile the comparative figures. You don't need to present it along with the financial statements. With regard to undisputed taxes to be reported in CARO advance tax, if I've applied, this is the question which I have already answered. 38. It was already there earlier. So that's all.
Minutes, I'll just check it up, sir. Okay, we are compiled it till 6:40. But we are answering the same one.
So if there are any questions someone wants to ask orally, I am fine.
Since it is a webinar pattern, sir, they are joined through web browser, so they can't unmute the mic. I'll try to post this one.
Okay.
So those who have joined in mobile, I'll just try to unmute them, sir. They're with.
Yeah.
So this one, sir. Accounting standard applicable to only material amounts. This is the one that came up now.
They can put it in the chat box if there is something like a chat box available.
I'll give you the person organizer, right, sir, where you can see the questions. It's 1 minute. I'll make it nicer. So you can see the questions pop up. You can scroll down and see based upon the time. You can see
Are
the
accounting
questions.
standards applicable only to material amounts? The answer is yes, it is only applicable to material, but follow materiality meticulously because it is defined in the conceptual framework to accounting standards. What is materiality and how do you apply? Otherwise, yes, it applies only to material amounts. Whether a private limited company having employees less than 10 mandatorily required to take actuarial, again you will have to see the materiality. If you believe it is not very material, then you can estimate, but provision is required. Now provision, whether you do it with actuarial valuation or you estimate it, that's a different thing, but provision is certainly required. if company is referred for CIRP under IBC in the mid of the year, whether original auditor can continue, that is for the IBC to decide, no? Because if you are getting under IBC, the IBC rules say that the auditors will normally cease to continue, but the original auditors can continue if the IBC or that professional really decides to do so. Can we state dispute with management as reason for resignation of auditor? You will have to write what is the dispute. You only cannot say there is a dispute. You write what is the dispute. Is it because they are asking you to sign something wrong? Is it because the fees are less? So write what is the dispute, and then you can resign with that reason.
So, any other questions? Yeah.
Yeah, it's
Last
coming.
line on
Please.
reduction on audit fee.
On audit fees on account of company's inability to continue with higher audit fees. Now, what is the meaning of this? If the company doesn't pay you audit fees which are commensurate with your work and efforts, then obviously you will have to leave the audit. No, you are not bargaining in an audit. No, that I will charge this much or that much. If you believe it is not commensurate with your cost, you will obviously have to give up the audit. No? Maybe on account of lockdown, people have not increased their audit fees or reduced temporarily, but that doesn't mean that you will run your office at a loss. No. Will loan from shareholders amount to deposit? It will amount to deposit if you are not satisfying those conditions of Section 73. There are limits under Section 73 from loans from shareholders. Company is in existence since 2 years only. As on March 21, they have profits of more than 60 crores. Do they have to provide for next year? Yes, the rules will apply. No. If the threshold is last 3 years, but they have also said last 3 years or as many years they have been in existence or something. See the new rules and they provide for such things. Can the audit fee not be commensurate be a reason for resignation? You will have to prove this from your records that your employee's cost is so much, the audit fees are so much, not commensurate, and therefore I am resigning. And you will also have to show that did you ask the management for an increase in audit fees and they refused. You need backup records to show this. Remember, resignation is not easy now. It is difficult to resign as auditors. Please give a qualified report and then resign. That is much more easier other than getting into all these arguments. Section 73 read with acceptance rule, security on supply of goods and services exempted. Now, yes, that rule is there, but you have to be clear whether it is really a security deposit. A lot of people take money and call it that it is a so-called security deposit and then say that it is exempt. In a lot of cases, there is no customer, there is no service being rendered, but you still call it a security deposit. Then you will not get that exemption. You will need orders, you will need an agreement for a security deposit. Then you can say that I am exempt under that Section 73. In case we are appointed as auditor of the company, since the management has not given data, we have not conducted audit and not signed financials. Is there any responsibility since it is non-compliance? If the management has not given you data and but you will have to prove that you had sent reminders to the management to send the data. Otherwise, you are not responsible at all. The company is responsible for the delays. Anything else?
Those were the questions. I have unmuted the participants also. Those who are willing, they can unmute and ask the questions. Those who are joined from.
Someone wants to ask them directly, that's fine. You can ask them directly also.
I unmuted them. So those who are willing, they can unmute and ask.
Yeah.
Those who are joined from.
So I can see a lot of attendees' names now. In a big company, having extensive ERP system audit report is not provided. This being a controlled deficiency, can this be included in IFC? So you include this as a qualification or a modification in IFC. Which para you see the guidance note of the institute? Can you please discuss in short once again with regarding maintaining books in IP address vis-a-vis cloud-based? I think you need to refer to section 129, because section 129 says that the IP address where your books of accounts are maintained has to be a location in India. Now, if that IP address is hosted somewhere which is outside India, then proper books of accounts are not said to have been maintained. And there is even a listed company where such a qualification was given by the auditors, that the IP address is a location which is outside India, and hence books are not maintained. Next year, the company had to do a mirroring of that IP address in India and have those books on a location in India as such. But read section 129, 128 and its commentary, and you will get this IP address. How is it within India, outside India?
Danya ma'am, you can unmute yourself and you can ask the query. You are unmuted.
Where the cycle of completion of some contracts take more than 1 year, what about advance received from customers? So see, first of all, this is section 73 is only for non-corporate customers. So if you are corporate customers, you should not worry at all. Otherwise, if they are non-corporate customers and the advance is more than 1 year, and if it is really genuine that it takes a longer period, then yes, maybe the exemption can apply. But in many cases, we have seen that this is just trying to misuse section 73, and there you will face problems. Should we sign on the left side or right side? Now, I am not concerned whether you sign on the left side or right side, but you please sign the right way. You please sign
Good
after
evening.
doing the right audit. That is all I think you should be concerned with.
Ma'am Danya, you can post your query, ma'am.
Good evening, sir.
Yes, good evening. Please go ahead.
Sir, I need a clarification. I have two questions. One is with regard to resignation. If the
Yeah.
resignation for it is due to the change in management, in that case,
Right.
what can be given and the reason in the resignation letter?
So you ask the management that please give me a letter that you are wanting me to resign because of the change in management. Ask them to give a letter, and that letter itself will be your reason.
Okay, okay.
And they will
Then
not
the
give you a
next.
letter. Let me tell you, they will not give you a letter.
Okay, okay, sir. Okay. Then
So which
another
means
question
you
is
don't resign.
whether a company can make a chit investment.
Make a
It's a
which investment?
manufacturing chit investment in chit company.
It can make, unless the articles, or the memorandum doesn't allow it to do so. It can provide wherever it wants to invest. No.
Okay. Then in that case, if in the first auction itself, if the company is calling for the chit and they are incurring a loss at a lesser amount if they are taking the auction, in that case, as per the accrual assumption, the loss has to be accounted in the initial year itself, in the year it's when it is incurred, or
That's
whether
right.
it has to be apportioned over the period of the chit term.
It depends on the chit term, no, whether it is accruing in the initial year or is it over a period of the chit fund which is there. And maybe when you are investing in a chit fund, you may need to follow some guidelines of the chit fund which are issued by RBI.
No, the company is a manufacturing company and it is making a chit investment. In case if you another chit company. So in that case, and the auction is made and
1 minute. So if you are investing in another chit company, it means you are investing in the shares of that company. Then I am only going to follow AS 13, no?
Okay, in that case, the loss has to be.
There is no loss, no. My investment is in AS as per AS 13 and follow AS 13. If the loss is a permanent loss, I provide. If it is temporary, I don't provide.
So those were the questions, sir.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay. I think we have come to the conclusion of the very, very excellent session, handled in very lucid manner. So enjoyed all the members, almost around 400 members throughout the session.
Okay.
Watching our, so they would have enjoyed the session. I request Panara sir to propose a formal vote of thanks. Sir, Panaraj sir.
I was muted by organizer. Yes.
Oh, okay, okay. Selva, okay, okay, sir.
Thank you very much, sir. Imanshu Kantarwala, sir. Your overall bird's eye view with insights into the important issues and about recent developments. It's an excellent presentation, a very compact presentation. And 422, to be specific, was the highest number throughout the session. I saw the numbers, even though there were some variations. And we are very happy that so many delegates attended this and made use of this one. And if at all any queries are there, you can put them to survey for its mail. If at all possible, the later stage also you will give it. And your experience and erudition and extraordinary what's called the wisdom of your knowledge on this subject has helped all of us so much. I have made notes of at least 4 or 5 pages in the process of your presentation. So thank you very much for your time and presentation, sir.
Thank you. Thank you.
Also, your experience has helped us a lot. And this is the time where our members have to equip themselves. I thank all the members for participating in good numbers, encouraging us to have such programs. And I thank the chairman for selecting this topic. I also thank the SIRC back office for the support along with Selva, the technical support. So thank you one and all, and good night for the day.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. Good night, sir.
Good night.